This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. You can visit their store by using my referral link in the description below. Hi everyone, I'm Nizzanotes, and it's Saturday, and that means it's time for Nizzanotes, my weekly vlog series where I talk about limited magic. And right now we're beginning a brand new format. We're beginning Innistrad Crimson Vow. It's out on Magic Arena. You're probably having your pre-release before too long. And in this video, I wanted to give my picks for the best commons and uncommons in the set to get you ready for your first drafts in the format. This is sort of like a Cliff's Notes of my set review, where I talked about literally every card in the set, and it's like, I don't know, 3.5 hours of content. In this video, I'm going to sort of distill that into just talking about the absolute best commons and uncommons, what I pick as the best commons and uncommons at this very early stage in the format. And we'll also do a crack-a-pack at the end of the video. We're back into our normal sort of schedule where we're talking about a format, cracking packs, etc. So, let's get started talking about the best commons and uncommons in Innistrad Crimson Vow. So I'm going to give my pick for the best common and the best 3 commons, and we're starting with white, and I think the best uncommon in white is Angelic Quartermaster. This thing is a 5-mana 3/3 flyer. Not a great stat line, but the fact is it comes down and puts 2 +1/+1 counters on your creatures. It can't put a counter on itself, sure, but it can put the counters anywhere else, and that's just going to be really good in every single white deck in this format. It's the kind of top curve that suddenly makes it so your board can swing in a way that it just couldn't before. Putting it on evasive creatures is great. Putting it on creatures who care about +1/+1 counters or creatures who can train other creatures for training is great. There's just so many things you can do with these counters. It's going to have a big impact on the board for 5 mana. This is going to be a card you see cast that just really swings a game in favor of the person who's playing it, and that's a big thing to say about an uncommon. So I think the third best white common is Sigarda's Imprisonment. These cards have been interesting. This kind of card used to just be white's best common in most sets. But lately, every set that we're looking at is one where creatures increasingly do things other than attack and block, first of all. And second of all, there's like a sacrifice deck. And there exists in this format the blue-black sacrifice deck. It's mostly about exploit. And just the fact that you can play this and you're like, yeah, I got rid of your creature, but then they just sack it for exploit and you come out pretty far behind as a result of that, that really weakens a card like this. To a place where it would have been unfathomable before. And also, lots of static abilities, lots of enter the battlefield abilities, lots of things that, this doesn't stop. But it's still a pretty good removal spell. I do think it's still in the lower range of premium at this early stage in the format. Maybe I'm a little optimistic. Maybe it'll turn out that it's not that good because of exploit and the reasons I just mentioned. But for now, I feel reasonable about the card. And I think you can even first pick it in a really weak pack. I think the second best white common is Griff Rider. This card's not exciting, but it's pretty nice. I mean, a 3-mana 2/1 flyer is going to get trained quite easily, and it's just going to get easily to a 3/2, and so you're paying 3 mana for a 3/2 flyer a lot of the time. And it's going to get bigger than that frequently, too. Getting it up to 4 power isn't crazy. And then there's all these +1/+1 counter payoffs. I just think Griff Rider is going to be sort of a bread and butter common for white aggro decks in this format. And I think kind of like the Imprisonment in a weak pack, you can consider first picking it. And I wouldn't feel bad at all about 3rd or 4th picking a Griff Rider. And I think the best white common is Fierce Retribution. And, this card's kind of a weird one. 2 mana to kill a creature that's attacking you is a nice card, but it's also not a card that's great if you're aggressive. Not all white decks are, but many of them are aggressive. And so it has some shortcomings, kind of like Sigarda's Imprisonment does, in that if you're the beatdown, this isn't a removal spell that gets a blocker out of the way, and that's a problem, at least not early, it doesn't. But it is nice that early in the game you can kill an attacking thing quite efficiently and usually get a mana advantage. And then in the later part of the game, it can just kill anything when you cleave it. So I like the flexibility on this card, and I think all 3 of these cards are pretty close, honestly, in terms of which one's the best white common. I think they're all cards that you don't feel ecstatic about first picking, but you can. Meanwhile, I think Angelic Quartermaster is something you'll feel pretty happy about first picking. It's better than a lot of the rares in the format. All right, let's move to blue now. In blue, I had a pretty hard time picking what I thought was the best blue uncommon. I went back through my set review, and there were a lot of blue uncommons that got like Bs or higher. In the end, I decided to go with Gutter Skulker, but I do want to say Biolume Egg and Whispering Wizard are 2 cards I also considered here. The reason these two didn't end up making it in the end is they're more build-aroundy, so you're going to be a little less happy first picking them. For Biolumag, you have to be in blue-black to really take advantage. For Whispering Wizard, you need to be in blue-red to really take advantage. Both of them are actually still good in basically any blue deck, but they're not great in any blue deck. Meanwhile, I think Gutter Skulker is good pretty much everywhere. A 4-mana 3/3 that's unblockable when it attacks alone is just a pretty good card anyway, especially because this format has auras, it has +1/+1 counters. There's things you can do to enhance it really easily, and what really pushes it into being a great uncommon is the fact that it has Disturb. I mean, you end up with two creatures that are basically must kills over the course of the game, all from one card, thanks to Gutter Skulker here. And I think that's really, really good. Again, blue has some nice uncommons. There are 3 I considered for this, and there's even a couple more who aren't that far behind. But for now, I think I like the Skulker the most. So what are the best blue commons? I think the 3rd best blue common is Notorious Throng, but this comes with a caveat. You need at least 3 of them to have it feel like it's one of your best commons in blue. If you only have 1, it's not good. If you have 2, it's fine, but it's not a great common. And if you have 3 or 4 or 5, it gets to be even better and even better. It's nice, especially in the exploit deck, because it's a thing you can sack and then you just get another creature out of the deal. But it's also going to be good in any blue deck if you end up with multiples, just because the idea of a 2-mana 2/1 that when it dies draws you a card, that's fine. I mean, it's not great like it is in blue-black, but it's a nice common when you get it in the right number of multiples. I think the 2nd best blue common is Lantern Bearer. This is just a 1-mana 1/1 flyer on the front, but what really makes it good is Disturb. Once again, all these things with Disturb. It's interesting because last time around Disturb gave us creatures, and I'd say on average, disturbing into an aura is less good because you're not getting like 2 full cards that can each trade for a card in the same way that you could with Disturb in the last set. But it's still graveyard value that's often attached to a creature that's already decent or better, and that's what we have with Gutter Skulker and Lantern Bearer. And Lantern Bearer is particularly attractive because it grants flying and +1/+1 from the graveyard. So in the early game, it can chip in for a few damage. Eventually it'll chump block, and then you can just suddenly make one of your creatures into a threat. It's also good alongside Exploit because early in the game, it can attack for a few damage. You can play something with Exploit later, sack your Lantern Bearer, and then, give that thing with Exploit flying if you want to. So it's a nice common. I'm going to be pretty happy playing 3 or 4 of these most of the time. Cruel Witness is, I think, the best blue common. It's a 4-mana 3/3 flyer, which is a great baseline. And then it comes with the nice ability to surveil every time you cast a non-creature spell. It fits into any deck. Obviously, blue-red's where you're going to have the most non-creature spells, but it does fit into any blue deck. And I would feel pretty good about first picking Cruel Witness. Not great. Lantern Bearer and Notorious Throng a little less so, but they are both quality commons. Gutter Skulker, obviously, yeah, I'm first picking that pretty happily, as well as, Biolumag and Whispering Wizard, 2 other cards I mentioned. So in black, I think the best uncommon is Fellstinger. That's right, I think it's better than Hero's Downfall, which is kind of crazy. Hero's Downfall is an amazing premium removal spell, but in this day and age, in Limited, more and more, these cards that are just 1-for-1s, like, they're good. This, Hero's Downfall kills anything really efficiently at instant speed. It's a great card, don't get me wrong. It's near the same level as Fellstinger. But more and more, it seems like just straight-up removal spells that trade 1-for-1, they're not as impressive as they used to be. And it's for reasons I mentioned when I was talking about removal earlier, too, in general. You have these removal spells that, kill a thing, but so often these cards leave value behind because they have an into the battlefield ability and things like that. So cards that generate extra value, that can generate a 2-for-1 and things like that, get to be more attractive. And that's what Fellstinger is. And it's also really flexible. Fellstinger is a 3-mana 3/2 with Death Touch. That's a card you'd pretty much always play in Limited. And then you add all this other stuff to it. All of it has to do with Exploit. And it gets flexible where you don't have to exploit if you don't want to. You can exploit something else if you want to and get some value out of it, like Biolumag, that's going to be particularly absurd. Or you can exploit the creature itself. If nothing else, you can sack Fellstinger to its own trigger. And drawing 2 and losing 2 here is a big deal. You end up netting a card even though you give up a card on the battlefield because you also have that 3/2 Death Touch that can trade for anything on the battlefield. So this card is a 2-for-1, like at worst most of the time. And sometimes if you're sacking a Biolume egg or a Doom Dissenter or whatever, it's going to feel like a 3-for-1. And that's just going to be absurd. I just think Fell Stinger brings way more value to you than Hero's Downfall. Again, Hero's Downfall is great. I think it's all, close to the same level as Fell Stinger, but for now, I'm leaning towards Fell Stinger a little more. So the 3 best commons in black, I think the 3rd best one is Courier Bat. So this has a great baseline as a Windrake. That's a card that often makes the cut. But if your deck has, 3 or 4 ways to gain life, you're going to play this, and sometimes it's going to be a cheaper Gravedigger with flying, and guess what? That's a 2-for-1. That's a card that can give you a 2-for-1. And if you're in black-white, it's going to be really easy to trigger. So it has a great baseline. In most black decks, you'll have a few ways to trigger it, and in black-white, it'll be really easy to trigger. I think the 2nd best black common is Blood Crazed Socialite. This 4-mana 3/3 with Menace comes down, makes a blood token, and I think it's going to be sort of the premier blood payoff at common. That's the black-red deck that likes blood, and this becomes a 5/5 if you sack a blood to it when it attacks, and it has Menace, so it can just really wreck people in a hurry. And then I think the best black common is Bleed Dry. It's premium removal, it exiles a thing, it can kill everything in the format, even the 1/13, and it does so quite efficiently. This is removal that I have ahead of these 2 other cards, but that's because these 2 other cards kind of need some other stuff going on to really make them work, and having removal that kills things, no questions answered, is important. Again, Hero's Downfall is good, just not as good as Fell Stinger. So with these black commons, I'd feel perfectly fine first picking Bleed Dry. I'd feel a little less good about the next 2. So in red, I had a hard time really choosing between 2 cards for the best uncommon. In the end, I settled on Rending Flame. 3 mana to do 5 damage to a thing at instant speed is just great. Sometimes you also shock your opponent at the same time, which is awesome. It's just a great deal. You can blow people out if they're using instants and stuff like that on their creature, putting auras on them, whatever. Great card. The other card that almost made it here, that I sort of switched at the last minute, deciding I didn't quite think it was as good as Rending Flame, is Alluring Suitor, this 3-mana 2/3 that can transform when you attack with exactly 2 creatures. When it does transform, it gives you back 2 red mana. It's got Trample, it's a 3/3, and it can pump itself in another creature, so it does a ton. But it's definitely geared more towards really aggressive decks, and, that's not going to be everybody. Rending Flame's great for everybody, and it's just a great premium removal spell. What are the best commons in red? Well, I think the 3rd best one is Blood Petal Celebrant, a 2-mana 2/1 that has first strike when it attacks, is a very nice creature to have. It's good if you're in black-red because you want blood, but it's also good if you're in any sort of aggressive deck, and does a good job. So next there's Flame Blessed Bolt. I think that's the 2nd best red common. 1 mana to do 2 to something at instant speed is basically always premium removal. You really end up with great trades here. Because you spend 1 mana to kill like a 4-drop sometimes. And the fact that it exiles things that it kills definitely matters. Getting rid of all these little spirits with Disturb when you blast it with this is going to feel pretty good. And I think the best red common is Abrade. It may just be the best common in the set. It's just really good. 2 mana to do 3 to something at instant speed is a great deal. Again, like with Flame Blessed Bolt, you're going to be trading 2 mana to kill something that costs 5 sometimes. 4 or 3 is more common. And there are artifacts in this set, and being able to blow those up, having that as an option is a big deal. So I'd feel pretty good about first picking, obviously, the 2 uncommons I mentioned, but also Abrade and Flame Blessed Bolt, less so about Blood Petal Celebrant. I think the best green uncommon is Cloaked Cadet. It is a little bit specific about where it fits in a deck because it needs you to have humans and +1/+1 counters. But the thing about the card is, all on its own, it basically says that when it attacks, it gets a +1/+1 counter, and you draw a card. You do need to have something else attack with at least 3 power, but that's not a big ask. And that means that this is sort of the baseline of the card, and that's a baseline of this card that's a 2-for-1 most of the time. And if you're really going crazy with humans and +1/+1 counters, it gets really crazy. If you have a turn where you can play this and then attack and train something else right away, you get to draw a card immediately, and that's going to be crazy. It could just turn into a card drawing engine, and that's a great thing to have on a creature that's pretty reasonably statted, especially once it gets that first counter. Obviously, I'd feel really good about first picking a Cloaked Cadet. What are the best green commons? Well, I think the third best green common is Rural Recruit. It's a 4-mana 1/1, but it brings a 3/1 along to play. It comes with training, so it comes with a pig that can train it when it attacks. That's just going to add significantly to your board for the amount of mana you spend on it, and that's pretty nice. I think the second best green common is Spore Crawler. Nothing fancy, but it's a 3-mana 3/2 that draws you a card when it dies, and that is a 2-for-1 most of the time, and that's just great. Outcarding your opponent is a good way to win limited. And I think the best green common is Wolf Strike. This thing is, we've seen this card before without the Knight upside, and it was really good in limited. This has that additional Knight upside, which will be the easiest to take advantage of in red-green. But, without the Wolf upside, it's really good. With it, it gets even better. Just being able to use this as a removal spell to just punch one of your opponent's creatures is good. The fact it's an instant is a big deal. Sometimes we see these effects at sorcery speed, and that makes it a lot easier for your opponent to disrupt it. But when you have an instant, you have a much wider variety of situations where you can cast it. Like if your opponent's tapped out at a given time, you can just fire it off right away. Other times with a sorcery, there's only one time you can really cast it during your main phases, and that definitely limits a card like this, but this doesn't have that limitation. So I'd feel pretty good about first picking Wolf Strike for sure, and okay about Spore Crawler. I don't really want to first pick Rural Recruit. And yeah, Cloaked Cadet, like I said, definitely something you feel happy first picking. So those are my picks for the best uncommons and commons in this limited format. All right, now let's do our first Crack-a-Pack for this format. This way I can show you, how I value certain cards, talk about specific cards, and yeah, talk about what I'd take in a pack one, pick one scenario. Here's our pack. Our first common is Hook Hand Mariner. This thing's a pretty nice little common. It's definitely not something you want to first pick, but a 4-mana 4/4 plays really well in limited, and the fact that it can't be blocked by little things if it transforms is nice. Not something you want to first pick, though. Spore Crawler, this was a card we just talked about. I talked about it as one of, the second best green common for me early in the format. And yeah, I would first pick it. I kind of hope I don't, but it's certainly better than Hook Hand Mariner. It's got this 2-for-1 in potential, which I think is really important in limited. Chill of the Grave. This card's solid. I think it's good in the zombie deck and the spell deck. It really tapping a thing down and drawing a card just is always a playable card. In limited formats, we see it all the time. And the fact that sometimes you'll get to do it for 2 mana in a zombie deck is great. Not something I really want to first pick, though. Blood Servitor, I think, is close to unplayable. It's just too inefficient. If you really have like all the blood payoffs ever, maybe it makes the cut, but no. Persistent Specimen, not something you want to take early. This is a card that's a great build around if you're in blue-black already and it looks like that's where you're headed. It's a great thing to exploit over and over again, but you don't want to take it early. Heron Blessed Geist, don't really want to take it early either. It's a kind of overcosted flyer that has a nice ability from the graveyard. That ability only works, though, if you have an enchantment, so it's really kind of geared towards blue-white more than anything else. And even in that deck, it's not like incredible. You'll play the first one basically always, but it's not something you want to take early. Serpentine Ambush, it's horrible. You see this kind of card all the time. I don't know why they keep printing them, I guess so we can have conversations about what makes this card bad. And in short, it's like a terrible trick in the sense that it doesn't always pump your creature by a relevant amount. If you have a very small creature, sure, it gives it +4/+4, and you're looking at like a Titanic growth effect. But if your creature's any bigger than that, and it will be, the bonus you're getting out of it gets lower and lower and less efficient, and it being this specific about what it does to the creature just isn't good, so you don't want it. Unhallowed Phalanx, not something you want to first pick. It's definitely a playable in the black-green deck. It's got some silly 2-card combos it can pull off, but you don't want to take it in a first pick ever. Crushing Canopy, it's a sideboard card. You don't want to first pick it. Sure Strike, this is a decent trick. It's a card that, especially if you're in an aggressive red deck, playing one of happens, but you don't ever want to first pick it. Wandering Mind, okay, that's our first uncommon. We're getting into an interesting card here. So, I just talked about all the best uncommons. I only talked about monocolored ones. Basically all of the multicolored ones, except maybe the black-green one, Ancient Lumberknot. They're basically all first pickable. They're all strong, and that's just how it is these days when they print Signpost uncommons. And this is true here too. It's a 3-mana 2/1 that with flying that will draw you a card most of the time if you end up in a spell deck. Now, there are disadvantages to first picking a multicolored card. If the percentage chance you play the card is lower than if you take a monocolored card. But if it's enough better than other stuff in the pack, you do it. And I do think it's enough better than Spore Crawler that right now I would be on Wandering Mind. We've also got Lunar Rejection, another uncommon. Nice bounce spell, has some Wolf or Werewolf upside. You always play it in your blue decks, but it's not really something you want to take early. Biolumag is where we're getting a little bit interesting, though. I mentioned that it is high up there in my ranking of blue uncommons. It's just, a 3-mana 0/4 that scries 2 when it enters the battlefield is a decently playable card in any blue defensive deck. And then if you have Exploit in your deck, it's just going to get silly because you're going to play a thing with Exploit, sacrifice the Biolumag, and get the Exploit effect, and then also get a 4/4 that can be unblockable. So, it's going to be very swingy. It's going to have huge impacts. And right now, I think I would take it. And the reason for this, first of all, I just think it has a higher ceiling than Wandering Mind. But it's monocolored. And you can actually, as I said, play it. You can play it in a blue-white deck. You can play it in a blue-red deck. Blue-black is where it's at its best, of course. But it's perfectly fine in those types of decks. And so you're more likely to play it than you are Wandering Mind. And I do think it also is just better in Wandering Mind than Wandering Mind when you really get there with the card. And then a rare is Inspired Idea. This is an interesting one. 3 mana to draw 3 cards is a great card in Limited. We've seen sort of conditional ways to do it before, and this is another one. You have to lower your maximum hand size. And, this card, it's not one I've played with or against at this point. And it's a hard one to judge. But I think you play it in basically every blue deck you play in the format. I think it's quite good. But I don't know that I think it's better than Biolumag or even Wandering Mind. The downside is real. If you are sort of a slower deck, the fact that you pay 3 to draw 3 and reduce the number of cards you can have in your hand is a big deal. When you cast it, you basically have to go down to 1 card in your hand, or you're going to have to discard at the end of your turn, unless you have more mana to use. Now, it does have Cleave, but then it gets a lot less impressive. 5 to draw 3 at sorcery speed. Still fine, but not incredible. I think it's a good card, but I think I would take it after Biolumag for sure. And I guess maybe I'd take it before Wandering Mind just because of the multicolored thing. But it's close. I think I'd take Biolumag in the end here. Like I said, it's sort of a blue-black card, even though it's not. But it has a very reasonable floor and an insane ceiling. And that's what I'm after here in this pack 1. Pick 1, taking this Biolumag. All right, so that does it for this edition of Nizzanotes. I'll be back next week talking about some of my first impressions of the format. Probably talk about some overperformers or underperformers or both. We'll see. You'll know by next Saturday what I ended up doing. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and share it so that others can enjoy it too. If you want to make sure you catch future editions of this, my draft videos, my set reviews, all kinds of other Magic content, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. If you want to make sure you're caught up on everything I've already created, you can check out my full set review for Crimson Vow. You'll see the playlist for it on your screen shortly. And if you like what I do and you want to give back, you can do that on Patreon. Thanks for watching.